This is the Wisdom Podcast.
Welcome to the Wisdom Podcast. I'm Daniel Aitken, and this week we are joined by Deborah Schoeberlein David, author of the new book, Living Mindfully at Home, at Work, and in the World. In this podcast, we touch on the difference between mindfulness and meditation and talk about what it might mean to be mindful every day. Deborah talks about how her mindfulness practice helped during the time of her father's passing and how that time was both extraordinarily painful and absolutely fine. Deborah then gives us some tips for living mindfully. And so here is Deborah. What prompted you to write another book?
So the real answer is that this is a book that's a reflection of experiences, and it's a reflection of a lifetime of experiences that then incorporates many, many other people and the wisdom and the voices that they have shared with us as we started to write. So the book came about because it needed to come about, and it came about through us. As a vehicle, not of us or from us, as if it were just our voice or some sort of wisdom we had to impart. However, wisdom had a great deal to do with the coming about of this book. In particular, my wonderful editor, Josh, who after the first book said, you have to do another book, and this time you have to write for a broader audience. And since I had come to trust him through the process in the first book, I really believed him and set about trying to do something which turned out to be very ambitious.
Yes.
But the process was confidence inspiring because when we came upon different chapters, we found in our life experience that people presented themselves with words that needed to be shared.
Yeah, I remember Josh running up to me after he got the manuscript, and he came in so excited and said, "This book is fantastic." So that's a memory I have. And so do you consider this book like a collaboration in terms of, not with wisdom, I'm talking about all the voices you're talking about and all the people you were talking with about mindfulness?
Look, I think anyone who's engaged in contemplative practice realizes that the practice is the common theme, and that all of us who come to it have our own unique experience, and we have our teachers, and we have the people who make a difference in our lives. But really, in the end, it's not about us as individuals. It's about the practice. So the book is from all of these people that I've had the privilege to work with through the years. And it's for all of them and for others who will read it. And it's very much intended as a dialogue. That someone who reads this book is going to read it and not feel like, oh, now I have all the answers, I know what to do, because really they're not there. But they're going to say, now I have some questions, now I have some tools, now I have some resources I can use in my own life, and I have some examples that can give me a little bit of comfort and companionship in realizing that the issues that I'm confronting are not just mine.
And it's nice that sprinkled throughout this book are resources like the mindful breath. And so it's actually a very practical book. And do you see this book as different from your last book, or for a different audience, or continuing the story? How do you relate the two books?
Well, the last book, which was really directed for teachers, took a very particular perspective in applying mindfulness. And it was a good place for me to begin because the content was sufficiently focused that I could feel comfortable exploring it. Living mindfully ranges in content from pretty much anything you can think of. And a lot of stuff is in there that isn't normally in books on mindfulness or on meditation.
Such as, what would you
I'm thinking specifically on the chapters, for example, on sex or on workplace, on parenting, which is a lot about the parents and not so much about the kids.
Yes.
Which is something we can return to and I feel quite strongly about.
Okay, let's do that.
And it's a book that's about nitty-gritty stuff in normal life. And I suppose you could say, how could you possibly write a book that has such a broad application because you can't get everything in there, and that's kind of the point.
Yep.
This is not the be-all, end-all book.
Yeah,
This is a starter companion.
Yes. And, living is a broad topic, right? So living mindfully is like really vast territory to cover. And so I think it's nice that there's so many books on mindfulness, right? And how to be mindful, but you've actually taken situations like mindfulness in relationships, mindful sex, mindfulness applied at the workplace. So it really is what it says it is, living mindfully.
Mindfulness is hot right now.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere, and it's getting a little, I don't know what the word is. It's almost a little sticky.
Yeah.
And risks being a turnoff. And
Yes.
so the question that I have in my work that guides me is, how do we not have it become something that people can feel that, been there, heard it, done it, on to the next thing?
Yep.
How can this be a quality of life
Yep.
that is integrated within who we are, so it remains with us, so it's durable?
Yeah. Not an exercise we engage in.
No, and not a fad.
Not a fad.
And also, just to kind of add on to that, not something that makes us automatically feel better or
For sure.
be happier,
Because
or
then it's just a replacement for materialism.
exactly.
And I was, the ubiquitousness of mindfulness. So it's very interesting, the development. So there's this word meditation, right, that had all this exotic, and maybe it wasn't going to go mainstream, maybe. And so then this word mindfulness has come about. And then now that word people are getting a bit like skeptical about, or mindfulness. So it's interesting, the development of these. I'm interested in how you think about mindfulness as in relation to meditation. Because meditation is something that we think, okay, I'm going to go meditate now. We don't really think, okay, I'm going to go mindfulness now. So I was wondering.
Some people might.
Yeah, some people might. I was wondering how you distinguish those two concepts, either theoretically or in practice.
Meditation's broader.
Yes.
Meditation is the whole umbrella under which there are myriad practices and approaches.
Mm-hmm.
Mindfulness is a particular training method.
Mm-hmm.
And in my opinion, and what I've learned from my teachers, is mindfulness is not the end of the story. It's not the thing we want to aspire to and be done.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think
There's no achievement of mindfulness.
we spend our lives meditating.
Yeah.
And we have mindfulness as a tool that we can bring into our meditation to enhance it and to make it more efficient and more effective. I think it's catchy because it is so discreet. Mm-hmm. And so people say, oh, mindfulness, I can get my head around that. I can do everything mindfully. Meditation has a depth or a profundity that is different.
Yeah. And I think that's a very traditional answer in some ways, an answer that says that mindfulness is an aspect of meditation. Mindfulness is like something that you bring.
Yeah.
Is a function that you are actually doing within meditation. So that's an interesting answer.
Meditation sounds scary for some people.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds very heavy. It sounds like you're going someplace else.
Mm-hmm.
It has a lot of connotations in religious traditions, and it is it's traditional. And mindfulness is lighter.
Yep.
The issue with mindfulness is that mindfulness by itself lacks a moral direction or a moral orientation.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the great concerns is, okay, so we're practicing mindfulness, but what do we do with it?
Yep.
And how do we make sure that our mindfulness is not just the achievement, but it's something that's dedicated to something more?
Yeah.
So how do we bring mindfulness into living in a more constructive way in the world, in ourselves, with others in relationship? How does that mindfulness infuse what we do so that whatever it is we're doing, which is more than mindfulness,
Yes.
is contributing more.
Yeah.
And that's the key. And that's really, as this field develops in the West, one of the big areas I think that we're going to see differences of opinion is going to be between people who are saying, well, mindfulness is for relaxation, or mindfulness is a way to kind of be more of what you are. And then there are going to be people who are saying mindfulness is something you train in and you use, not so that you breathe better or that you can listen more mindfully or eat more mindfully or whatever, but it's so that by living mindfully, you're able to give more in the world and contribute in a way that's effective.
Yeah.
And that's the key. But when you take it away from that moral construct, it becomes a little iffy. It's not enough.
Meaning that you can apply mindfulness practice to something that is not benefiting the world, or do you think by...
Mindfulness is about training and attention and awareness.
Yeah. So let's talk about what mindfulness looks like in action.
In action, mindfulness means you know what's happening inside you and around you in the moment as it's unfolding. You're able to take into consideration your own inner environment, your feelings, your physical sensations. You're hungry, you're tired, all of those kinds of things. You're able to be aware of the memory patterns that you have that you might associate and impose on something that's happening. And you're aware of what's going on around you.
Yeah.
And because of that heightened attention and awareness, you have the capacity to place your attention where you want to and to keep it there, and not to be distracted. Alert to what else is going on so you can use that information, but not distracted by it.
What do you say to someone who, because many of us live in distraction to not face what's within, in a way, so the entertainment, which is by nature unsatisfactory. That's why we have to keep going to the movies and see the next episode.
Yeah, but it's so much fun.
Yeah, it is so much fun. So yeah, exactly. So, but it's like some people might think that sounds terrible to be aware of exactly what's going on in my mind.
No, Daniel, no, don't.
Let me play devil's advocate.
Being a killjoy, no. That is not what this is about. No, the idea with mindfulness is you're going to the movies and you know what you're experiencing at the movies. Yeah. And if you're having a great time and it's good and it's fun, you know it and you enjoy it.
So you find you think of mindfulness as an enhancement to life.
I think it's an enhancement, but I think really what it is it's allowing us to make choices about what we do.
Okay.
So if I go to the movies and the movie causes me to engage in a way that's constructive, by deepening my experience, by triggering my empathy, by causing me to see things in a different way, by exposing me to the visual beauty of what's on the screen, that enhances my life. If the movie causes me to think thoughts that cause me distress, I need to know that so I can be aware of it. And then I can work with it. Not that I'm going to go to the movies and be there to work with my sort of distress. That's not a good reason to pay for a movie ticket. Yep. But I want to know that's what's going on so that when I feel unsettled and I walk out, I know why I'm feeling unsettled so I can manage it. So I don't, try to swipe at somebody as a result.
A type of conscious living, if you will.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this book is not a purist book about living the life of an ascetic.
Yes.
This is a book about living a normal life. And it's a book that doesn't have any guilt whatsoever about enjoying what it is to be human. This is where we are. This is the life we have. And I would propose a much gentler approach, which is that in this instant, in this moment, there's potential for all sorts of things in every instant and in every moment. Rather than worrying about why am I not realizing the potential for this and why am I focusing on that or why am I torturing myself with this other thing, what if instead we start to learn just to pay attention to where we are and how we are and to apply a very simple measure of awareness to that, which is this helping? Is it working?
Is what helping? Is what working?
The way that I'm experiencing my world.
The way that I'm living.
The way that I'm living. Is it constructive or not?
Yeah.
And then we get into things like, well, what about when I feel intense anger or frustration? It's not get rid of the anger or the frustration. It's what do I do with it? What can I learn from it? And where does it come from? Where does it go to?
How did you come to this? Like, how did you come, your journey in terms of learning to live mindfully? How did you learn about mindfulness?
Mindfulness as a particular practice came very late for me.
Mm-hmm.
And meditation, going back to our earlier conversation, meditation came much earlier.
Okay.
But the real answer is, like so many others, I was aware of lacking the tools that would let me live in a way that I wanted to live. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't find those tools in other arenas. Mm-hmm. I couldn't find them in religion. I couldn't find them in psychology. I couldn't find them in the kind of conventional 1990s and early millennia thing of like go exercise or whatever. Yeah. It wasn't there for me. Mm-hmm. And so I was looking for a way to live that was practical because it seemed like there had to be a better way. Mm-hmm. Yes. And I came to it. I grew up in New York City and was very much, as I mentioned in the book, the product of a conventional, conservative kind of upper middle class upbringing. Mm-hmm. Where spirituality was pretty intellectual and pretty dry and a lot about thinking things and not a lot about how do you go beyond the thinking. Yeah. And I remember when I was in college going to a Zen monastery that was in Bar Harbor, Maine, of all places. And Bar Harbor, I think, had not seen anything that resembled a Zen monastery. Didn't really know what to do with the people with the shaved heads, but welcomed them, and started sitting. Mostly because it seemed like a good idea. Yeah, I'm gonna try this. I'll try this, and I had a marvelous teacher who was the senior student of the abbot of the monastery, who had started out studying Tibetan Buddhism and then found that she was really called in the Zen tradition. And she sat with me and pretty much was able to make a space that was comfortable for me to be there. And it's due to her that this really began in earnest.
How long were you going to that?
It's just in the course of a summer.
Okay.
And I'm not a morning person, so it was really it was a really hard thing to do the 5:30 sit, and it was absolutely worth it. Yeah. And then from there, I realized that wasn't quite what sang to me, the Zen tradition, and I did the opposite of what she had done, and found that the Tibetan Buddhist path made more sense. Okay. And pursued that.
Yeah. And how long were you studying with Tibetan teachers?
Ever since.
Ever since. Oh, great.
So the question of mindfulness, what I realized maybe about 15 years ago or a dozen years ago was that my practice is mine, it's personal. I'm immensely grateful for that practice and for my teachers. It's not what I write about, and it's not what I would seek to impose on anyone else.
Because it's sort of unique to you, and its benefits are unique to you, and when you're talking to others and writing for others, because when you write, you're writing, even though you're writing in a way with others, you're writing for others, and so that conversation's got to be different.
I really loved the first podcast Wisdom that you did with His Holiness Karmapa. Yes. Yeah. And in that he mentioned that there's really a fourth category. Yes. Yeah. And I thought, okay, again, here he is just telling us exactly what it is. And it made so much sense. In that fourth category, it's the secular category. And it's people who are interested in what can be called Dharma, but don't even need to know it's called Dharma. Yeah. And they're interested because it makes sense, and it's practical, and it's a resource. And maybe, just maybe, if more people can hear and understand and internalize some of these teachings, then it would be better for the world and for us in it. So I'm in that fourth category in my public persona, and that's what I write for. Yes. And mindfulness makes sense in that category.
For sure, yeah.
It is the means of exchange.
Yeah.
And so that's why my books have been about mindfulness.
Yeah.
And it's why I think when we look at the depth of the book, the depth is in the invitation to the reader to apply the content in the reader's own life.
Mm-hmm.
The depth is not in my saying something that's so incredibly wise or profound that it's going to be changing somebody else.
Yeah.
This is a book that's an invitation
To go on a journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's saying, here, take me with you.
Yeah.
Because these are tough journeys.
Yeah, yeah. Here's some tips for rookies.
Yeah, and here's somebody that's done it, because none of us, we all do this alone. But it's nice to know that you have friends along the way.
Yeah, yeah. Friends, guides, more so than like the role of the teacher, which is a more traditional approach. This is I'm a guide, or I'm a friend on the journey.
And I really like words, and so for me it's fun to use them to support this process. But the last chapter of the book is an encouragement to please find a teacher, a true teacher.
Good.
Because I think that people read books like this and they say, okay, now what?
Yeah.
Because that interaction, as Karmapa said, that interaction face to face with a real teacher is so crucial.
And what's the role of that interaction? Like, there's some. What do you find is the value of having interaction with a live teacher? What's so important about it that you can't get necessarily from a book or watching something on the internet, which we also spoke about the Karmapa as well.
Sure, and my response will sound not surprisingly much in line with his, which is that it's that human interaction. There's an energetic exchange that occurs between human beings. And that our teachers help us stay honest with ourselves. And they stimulate us and they push us and they create openings. And sometimes when we're really lucky, it's almost like we can climb on their backs and they'll take off. And we can see things from a height that we couldn't see otherwise. And then when we come back and go back into our normal lives, we have the memory and the confidence that that's possible.
Yes.
And so we keep flapping our wings a little bit harder so that in the end, hopefully, we can get there on our own. But I think that's what a real teacher does. It's a transcendent space. And it's the same in any content domain. And it's the same in the world of distance learning and online teaching in any area discipline now.
Yeah. It's very hard to learn piano from a book.
Sure.
Very hard, maybe a bit easier, but still hard to learn from YouTube instructional videos.
Can't do it. There's
something special about having the teacher listening to what you're playing and giving you feedback.
And it's because we're human.
Yeah.
So long as we're human, I believe we will need human interaction.
Interactions, yeah.
But there's a lot we can do in a conversation with ourselves, particularly as adults. There's an enormous amount of learning that we can do with that internal dialogue, and we can use other resources that interact with us passively.
Like what are you thinking when you talk about
other resources?
Yeah.
Books,
podcasts,
what we're doing right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Watching a audiovisual presentation, listening in a lecture.
Yes.
Where somebody is simply giving a presentation, but there is no back and forth. All of these are supports for learning, and they fuel learning. But eventually, it's the gaze of the teacher. Eventually, it's what do I experience when I'm in the presence of somebody who I trust enough to stand in front of.
Nice.
And when I stand there and allow myself to be seen, what do I experience and what can I see? And that, I think, can't happen in a book.
Yeah, true. I was thinking about you mentioned you think of the book as like an invitation for a journey. And part of like traveling and journeys, shared experiences are very important. Or someone who's gone on a journey and comes back and says, this happened to me. And so, So So I was wanting to hear about times when you face struggles and living mindfully has helped. So I'm sort of...
Time?
No, times.
A time.
A time.
We're talking in the singular here.
That
Seriously?
one moment.
That's so I and in the book I mentioned my father, and my father was actually very involved in reading drafts of the book and giving me feedback. And like Josh, he was not given to hyperbole. So when he said this good, this makes sense, you did good, I said, okay,
You could trust that.
all right, I can trust that. My dad passed away this summer, and he passed away not unexpectedly, in the sense that he was an older man and he had a lot of health issues, but he had been doing fine, and we were in the car driving on the way to meet him for vacation, the first vacation in the U.S. that we would have shared with him in quite a long time, because we had been living overseas for the last 3 years or so. And we got back to the country, and we had a couple of days to get our feet on the ground and organize things, got in the car, started driving, and got a call. And the call was, Dad's in the ER. And so we kept driving because that was where we were headed, but we didn't go to the hotel. We went to the emergency room. And that began a 3-week period of being with him when he was in hospital, ultimately resulting in his dying in hospital. And we started in one hospital, and then we were air transported back to New York City, which is where he was living, to be in another hospital closer to more family. And we were there all the time. And as his condition progressively got worse and the complications became more difficult to manage, we also encountered a lot of real opposition on the part of the hospital staff to allowing him to be able to have a dignified death. He chose to discontinue dialysis because he realized that he could never return to a quality of life that was anywhere near where he had been or what was acceptable. And he didn't want to have the ongoing suffering and compromise that would have ensued. And he made a choice that took an enormous amount of courage and presence of mind and peacefulness. And we supported him. And then we had to advocate for him because the doctors in that particular hospital believed that was not a reasonable decision for somebody who was so intelligent as he was and had been all of his life. And it was dumbfounding for me that people who had sworn an oath to do no harm felt that they had a right to impose their own values and their own perspective because they weren't ready for him to let go when he was ready. We had some wonderful heroes in the process who helped us, but there was no time for me to go and say, oh, I think I'll just go on retreat now and sit a little bit for to get my head together, and there was no real time for practice and privacy because we were in the hospital. So what I realized was that eventually there comes a point for each of us when things are so tough and so difficult that we realize that our capacity to manage them is a result of the depth of the training that we committed to beforehand. And that training kicks in. It's not the reason for the practice. But when you have it, when you have that memory of having it, you can apply it even under extraordinary circumstances.
It's like a foundation you can rest on.
You can rest on it. And so when the doctors came in and said, well, we're not ready to let him go. We think he should go to a nursing home and suffer for a couple of months before he makes the decision. And all I could feel deep within me was this kind of vast openness of space, and this realization that that wasn't how it was going to play out, and that I had to bring every bit of skill that I had and every bit of presence that I had to work with what was there to help him have the outcome he wanted, which was to die naturally and to die peacefully. And to find some way to appeal to their compassion and their empathy so they would permit that to happen. If we'd been in hospice, wouldn't have been an issue.
Yes.
If we had been at home, it wouldn't have been an issue. So it's something that was incredibly difficult in terms of circumstances, and extraordinarily painful and absolutely fine. Because everything that had needed to be said with him had been said. And every ounce of our energy went to being with him as he was. And he was able to accept it. And so those last days with him were, they were living and dying mindfully.
For him.
For him and for us.
And for everyone there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And for us, letting him die.
Yeah.
And being present with letting him die. Yeah. And holding my own grief. And knowing that grief had tipped me way beyond the bounds of what's healthy in terms of stress.
Yeah.
But being able to hold it so that I could be with him in that was an extraordinary blessing from the practice.
Yeah. The ability to be present there. And be how consciously you wanted to be there. And also, what I'm thinking is, you also couldn't just, like, living mindfully isn't passive. It was active. You were like living mindfully, and it was active. You had to deal with these people who had other opinions, and you had to advocate for someone. So people who think that living mindfully is like a passive, this is just exactly the opposite.
No, this was completely this was fierce.
Yeah.
This was mindfulness, as we talked about it earlier. Knowing my own internal landscape, knowing my grief, knowing my distress, knowing the level of my stress and what that was doing to my thinking, and being aware of all of those factors, and then understanding what it meant to be in a hospital and what was happening with him and his pain, and what I could and couldn't do for him, and what I couldn't do within the system, and using all of that to be as effective moment by moment as I could be. And no, it wasn't passive. And it probably didn't look very pretty. And what I realized is that the desire to make other people happy because it's a way to avoid conflict or to avoid their discomfort, that falls away when you realize that what's most important is living as close to what's true as you can.
Yeah, like an authenticity in that space.
Yeah, and you stand there, and you let them see you as you are, and if they don't like it, that's their problem.
Yeah. Did your father, so he read your book?
Yeah.
Was he doing the exercises that you suggest, like the mindful breath? Did you get any feedback on his experiments with some of
my dad my dad was extremely he was an extremely humorous and very, very bright man, and he was often extremely impatient, and he used to really do very bad things in restaurants to waiters, which was always a source of embarrassment for us in the family, because if things didn't appear the way he wanted them to appear, he was quite quick. And I always just think, oh, Dad, just patience, just a little generosity here, please. And then he would say, and I read your book and I'm very mindful. And I think, oh, okay.
He said mindfulness is not about being passive.
He said, okay, fine. And then I thought, who am I to judge? Because I'm not on his inside. I don't know what he's doing, and I don't know why he's doing it. And you know what? Actually, in those last days in the hospital, I did a lot of what he did, because it was at that point the only thing that was going to get things done.
Yeah.
I tried not to be cruel. I tried not to be harmful. I tried not to be hurtful, but to be strong and firm and sharp. Yeah, that was what had to be. So did my dad practice this? Not sure. On the other hand, watching him move from the realization that he had crossed a line from how his life had been to needing to recede from this world so that he could move on.
Yeah.
The way he did that, and the death that he had, from what little I understand in the teachings about death and dying, he had a really good death. And I think that he was able to pass in that way suggests that he understood far more about this practice than I ever imagined.
Yes.
And how he came to it, or what he was able to do with it, that was private to him. That he said that the book touched him and made sense to him is a gift to me.
Yes.
The way he died, he taught me how to die.
Yeah, what a teaching. And part of being present is there's so many teachings around us as we go through
the time.
day. Yeah.
All the time. And I remember just how we asked him, are you scared? And he said, I'm not scared, I'm sad.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, so this is a person who hasn't had a practice. All of us who kind of promote practice is good for us. Or, if you practice, it's good for you, that kind of thing. And he didn't do that. He did whatever he did. But in the end, he had an extraordinary dignity. And the nurses, the last few days just before he died, or when the nurses went off shift not to come back again, they came in spontaneously to say goodbye to him.
Wow. So he had that effect on people.
And they said, it's been an honor to take care of you, sir.
Yeah.
And we saw that happen. That in a place where people get jaded.
Yes.
That these caregivers had been touched by him. So I think that's the practice in life.
Yes.
And if we're able to be present, perhaps we can see what's really here. And we can learn from it. And perhaps then we can share it more purposefully with others.
Very nice. Living mindfully includes dying mindfully.
Absolutely.
Everything mindfully.
Everything mindfully. And including the ecstasy and the joy and the gratitude. And when you're mindful that you're just this close from despair.
So who do you hope will read this book?
I hope that this book will appeal to people who have a genuine desire to live in a way that's more constructive in the world. I hope it will appeal to anyone who can benefit by it. But I especially hope it will appeal to those who are fueled by some kind of practical sense of wanting to live a little bit more effectively for themselves, for the ones they love, for the world in general. I'm much less interested in sort of mindfulness junkies reading the book. I hope many will, but not because it's the next fix in a hunger. I hope it will cross lines
Mm-hmm.
and appeal to people who read privately on their own because they're hoping for something that will support their own journey.
I was thinking that also that, people as they are in their journey, they could pick this book up and start at different chapters, right?
Absolutely.
So like you could start on the relationship chapter, right? Or do you have a specific approach to the book that you suggest for people, or?
It very much depends upon what kind of experience people have coming into it.
Yes.
So if someone has never had any mindfulness practice experience, probably makes sense to begin at the beginning.
Yeah.
And at least skim through some of the narrative and get to the places where the instructions are for the techniques.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're not versatile with the basic techniques, the focus, observe, refocus,
Yeah.
progression, it doesn't make sense later on.
Yeah.
Relationships are complicated and very complex.
Yeah.
Applying mindfulness in a relationship, that's where it has to be applied, but it's hard to start.
You need to train
there.
first.
It's daunting. So if you've never been exposed to mindfulness, take a look in the beginning and then go to what suits you. On the other hand, if you're trying to figure out why should I even be interested in mindfulness, then flip to a chapter that appeals to you
Mm-hmm.
and see if what's in it seems to make sense. And it's kind of like when you're learning a foreign language and you get maybe 2/3 of what other people are saying, and it's enough to get a sense of the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
but it leaves you wondering what they were really talking about. Then you go back.
Sounds good. You mentioned the structure of focus, observe, refocus.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that and
Yeah.
how it might, yeah.
Yeah. So in the approach to mindfulness that the book presents, the basic idea is that all mindfulness practice at all levels involves these 3 steps.
Mm-hmm.
It involves placing your attention on something, which is focus.
Mm-hmm.
It involves observing, which is actually 2 different things simultaneously. It's observing the quality of your attention while you are keeping that attention on something.
Mm-hmm.
So you're watching to see, am I staying focused on breath, because that's really an easy one, and then what kind of attention am I paying to that breath? And when, and I say when because for most of us it's not if, it's when am I going to lose my focus, which happens really fast, at which point you refocus.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a constant tightening of a loop in which you place attention somewhere, you notice if it's able to stay there, and not just if it's able to stay there, but you notice whatever it is you're paying attention to.
Yeah.
So you could be paying attention to, for example, the experience of love.
Mm-hmm.
And you're focusing on feeling that love that you have for someone.
Yeah.
And then you notice, am I continuing to cultivate, to generate, express that love towards that person? And how does it feel when I'm doing that?
Mm-hmm.
And then my phone just buzzed in my pocket.
Yeah.
And I totally lost what I was doing. And now I'm worrying about, the guy from work who's calling to tell me I got to be there tomorrow early. And it's over. And that's fine. Because that's when you refocus on the love.
Yes.
Not on the, I can't believe I lost it
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
got distracted by the phone. You just go right back to the love.
That's why it's called refocus.
Refocus back to the love.
And so what you're saying here is that focus can be on any, like we often talk about the breath, but it can be on any object, and it can even be on a subjective state such as love, and you're looking at not just what that's like, but what is my attention like as
That's
well, and that informs the refocusing.
Right.
Nice.
So you want to catch it as soon as possible, and that's where I'd say, let's not define mindfulness in the context of, let me focus on being relaxed. Okay, I'm observing how relaxed. Okay, I'm really dull and I'm really relaxed. No, I feel really zoned out. No, that's not mindfulness. That's some other thing.
Well, this very limited object, which is relaxation.
That's relaxation. And that's fine if that's what you want to be doing, but if you're going to be doing it, be mindful about it and know that that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because then when you get like falling asleep, you can decide you have to wake back up again so you can continue focusing on relaxing.
Yes.
it's a deeper level. And we do it at the micro level, which is the breath, or looking at an object, or looking at the child who's sleeping, who terrorized us all day long and tried our patience. And then you go in at night when your toddler's asleep, and you look at that angelic face, and all you feel is that love as a parent, and you glory in it, because that's true. And then you refocus on that. And then the next day at the macro level, when your child is doing what they do when they're toddlers, then you have that deeper, bigger perspective to be mindful, to remember that is part of experience, but not all of it.
Yeah. So you're touching on something you mentioned earlier, the mindful parenting, which is a chapter in your book, and you made the comment that this approach to parenting is as much to do with the parent as the child. And so can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So look, in parenting children, the parent is the parent. So parenting is about the parent. How we parent creates conditions for our children to grow in ways that can be incredibly successful and constructive or not. The issue fundamentally on parenting is the parent's perspective. Children have their issues too. And parents need to be able to be clear enough to differentiate between their own stuff and their kids' stuff. So they can see what is going on with the kid accurately and do what they need to do to support the child. And that might mean to support the child in optimal performance. A kid who is a talent, who needs opportunities to grow with that incredible talent. A kid who's gentle and needs chances to be able to care gently for a pet, and to grow and to deepen into that incredible quality. Or a kid who's suffering, who needs professional help. Absolutely. That's where the parent's clarity is so critical, but the parent is mature and the child is not. And so the responsibility falls on the parent. And one of the things that causes me a fair amount of concern that I see more and more in the general media is this notion of that we can impose mindfulness or mindfulness practice on people, and children in particular, but people, and I'll come back to that, for their own good. So we can fix them by making them more mindful, and that is so wrong. It's so wrong. Because
tell us a little bit more about
why it's wrong.
The problem with fixing people by making them more mindful.
Well, first of all, I mean, did you just listen to what you just said?
I know,
That's the problem.
Exactly.
So mindfulness has to come from within. You need to have a desire to want to pursue the practice. If you force someone else to focus, observe, and refocus, and they don't want to, not only will it not help them, but you may cause harm. And you may cause harm because they're going to be resistant to it, as they should be. And then they don't come back to it later when they might. If you tell the person, your partner, your spouse, oh, couldn't you just be more mindful with me? And, what is that person going to do or say back to you in that moment? Well, I can show you, I can't say it on the microphone. So that's what's going to happen. And that's real. So don't use mindfulness as a kind of moral hammer that you use to bang on somebody to beat them into submission to being a better behaved person. That's not what this is about at all. Can we teach kids to be mindful? Yes. How? By being mindful ourselves. Can we teach mindfulness in schools? I actually don't think we can. Not up until probably high school in terms of pure practices. Not formally. Can we create opportunities for mindfulness to emerge, for the precursors to develop? Absolutely. Can teachers do that in all sorts of ways? Yes, read the book. That's in there. Parenting. Can we tell the kids now it's time to take our mindful breath? You can, but they'll probably use it back at you. Mom, you need to take a mindful breath. And then when you want to say, shut up, back to your kid, then you have to really be, because then you see what's going on with it. And that's not where we want to go. So,
refocus, Mom.
So, be careful what you wish for, because you're going to get it. So we use the mindful, we set the example. If we as parents can seek to be mindful, when our kids are little, if we can narrate to them our emotions and tell them what we're doing in order to manage them better, they'll learn. Mm-hmm. Honey, I am so frustrated right now because my car just broke and we're stranded here and we're late, but we're safe and we're okay. And I'm just going to take some breaths because it's going to help me calm down. You tell that to a 4 or 5-year-old, they may not remember what you say, but they'll remember very powerfully what you did.
It's modeling mindfulness, really, for them.
And the other great thing is, and you do this, I did it with my dad at 78, was, Dad, just breathe with me. Mm-hmm. Not you take those breaths. Yeah. Just sit and breathe with me. Mm-hmm. Hold my hand and just let's share the space and let's just breathe. And then he could piggyback onto my breathing. Mm. And when his breathing was ragged, he could feel mine, and it helped him breathe, and that caused his body to relax, and that reduced his pain.
Nice.
So we do it by how we live.
So that's Deborah, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. You can find out more about Deborah and her new book, Living Mindfully, at podcast.wisdompubs.org. That's podcast.wisdompubs.org. On the next episode, we have Stephen Batchelor, author of Buddhism Without Beliefs, Confessions of a Buddhist Atheist, and his new book, After Buddhism. This is a great episode where we dig into a number of topics, including what it means to be a skeptic, his understanding of key Buddhist doctrines such as the Four Noble Truths, karma, and even past and future lives.
If there is a future life, then the best way to prepare for it is to live fully and honestly and truthfully and compassionately and lovingly and wisely now. And if there's not a future life, then you've done the best you possibly can here and now. That to me is the crucial point. It's not about getting into is there afterlife or rebirth. That's academic, frankly. The issue, see, even people who believe in rebirth and multiple lifetimes are doing so because that enables them, they found that to be the most effective way of living a meaningful life now. So at some level, we're all secular Buddhists.